What is going on, y'all? It's your boy VeLL, and we are back with another Mobile Legends video. Now, this is going to be a really good video, and I feel like this is going to really help spread a lot of information around the community. So let's try to get this video to 1,000 likes. Like this one, seriously, I want to get this video to a bunch of likes so it actually shares around the YouTube algorithm and stuff like that, so more people can see this video. So go ahead and drop that thumbs up and help me spread this information, because this is really going to help a lot of people. So as you all know, I'm a mythic player, but because of this new system, I haven't been playing that much, and when I do play, since I'm still like Legend 2 or 1 or something like that, basically I still get paired with epics because Mobile Legends matchmaking is doo-doo. So essentially, when I play with epics, you can instantly tell who's the epic on your team from the decisions that they make. So I kind of want to bridge that gap so it's not so obvious, so people are making better decisions when they're playing and stuff like that. So in this video, we're going to be talking about who should be taking a buff priority and things like that, and how to lane surrounding around the buffs when it comes to the buffs and stuff like that, because laning switches based on the heroes that you select. So that's what we're going to be doing. So we're going to be doing a little test here. What I want you all to do before we jump into it, make sure you subscribe to the channel, drop the thumbs up and all of that, but I'm going to ask you all a question, and I want you to write your answers down below in the comment section before I even explain my thoughts to you. So starting off, tell me what lane each person goes in the comment section down below, and tell me who gets the buff. Like, what's the buff priority? So I want, like, on this team that I'm going to give you this example, is going to be 4 people who can benefit from having a buff. I want you to know which 4 people who can benefit from having a buff, and also 1, 2, 3, and 4. Who would be your, like, who would get the buffs in that order? So let me know that down below, and also remember, tell me which lane that they're going to be in. So the team that we're going to be talking about, here's just a generic team: Hayabusa, Guinevere, Leslie, Gaijin, and Kufra. So this is a 5-man team. It's not that bad of a team. It's a decent team comp. I tried to put something together somewhat realistic, so this is a decent team comp, and it has 4 heroes that benefits from the buff. So if you don't know which heroes those are, the heroes that benefits from the buff is Hayabusa, Guinevere, Leslie, and Gaijin. So with these 4 heroes in mind, when it comes down to laning, how would you set up the lanes, and like what's the buff priority? So yeah, make sure you comment that down below. Now let's actually talk about this. We're going to talk about this. I'm going to give you all one more example at the end of the video, just in case you all didn't know or you got something wrong, and we can go over it with the second example as well. But okay, so the way that this laning would be set up is Hayabusa would be bottom lane, Guinevere would be top lane, Leslie would be top lane, Gaijin would be mid, and Kufra would be mid. Now, the reason that this laning is set up like this is because basically Kufra is going to be peeling for Gaijin. Kufra is going to be basically giving Gaijin easy kills. Like Kufra diving on people from bushes, then Gaijin just jumps out and just uses his skills. What a lot of people don't know is that when it comes down to god mid laners and stuff like that, the mid lane role is basically dependent on how good your support in that lane is. So Kufra just brings much more value than any other hero on this team would to Gaijin, and it's all about Gaijin in the early game. He's going to basically be the one pushing the game forward early on throughout the gameplay. So yeah, those two, it only makes sense that those two are together. Next, we have Leslie and Guinevere in the top lane. The reason that they're in the top lane is because, honestly, Hayabusa needs to be in the solo lane. It's really that simple. So whoever was left over has to be in the top lane, since it's better for Kufra and Gaijin to be together. So keeping that in mind, now we're going to talk about buff priority. Who gets the buff in this situation? Who gets the buff? Like, what's the buff priority? So I'm going to tell you all, the number 1 person who gets the buff in this situation is Gaijin. He's number 1. Number 2 is Hayabusa. Number 3 is Guinevere, and number 4 is Leslie. Now, let's go over why. The reason why Gaijin is top priority is because Mobile Legends is all based around the mid lane. If Gaijin does not get the buff, that means that he can't rotate, gank your lane. So you're gonna be getting ganked by multiple people, and you're gonna be mad like, yo, why you didn't rotate? And he's not gonna be able to rotate because he don't have a buff. So that's the type of stuff that happens when the mid laner does not get his buff. And that's why it kills me when I see Leslie's just taking people's buff and stuff like that when they shouldn't. Like, and it's what people don't know is that yes, marksmen can benefit from having the buff, but there is a chain of command. So make sure you're not breaking that chain of command, because you could really be hurting your team. Like, so many times I've been a mid laner and I get paired with an epic Leslie or something. Leslie literally takes my buff the entire game. Leslie will take my buff the entire game and then call me trash. You're like, you're never stopping them when they gank me. You're never helping. You're never with Gashin without a buff, it's not going to be as useful as a marksman can be without a buff. Like, it's just that simple. Certain heroes are absolutely useless if they don't have a buff. So yeah, that's something that you got to keep in mind as well. Certain heroes are absolutely useless without a buff. So when you're going around taking people's buff, that could be enough to be like, basically you're countering your own teammates. So yeah, and the reason that Hayabusa needs the buff as well is because he's going to be split pushing the game forward, and because he's the solo laner, he's more likely to be ganked by multiple people. Like, if 4 people roll up on Hayabusa, he's in a tough situation. So he needs to be able to get his skills back as fast as possible. He needs to be able to clear and push the lanes as fast as possible. And yeah, so that's why Hayabusa would be second. Guinevere, the reason that she would be third is because Guinevere brings more to the team. Guinevere brings more to the team because she can constantly dive on the enemies and hit them with a bunch of crowd control, leaving Leslie with an opportunity to constantly be striking people with her pokes, with her basic attacks. So that's why that's the buff, basically the buff hierarchy in when it comes to this. Leslie would be the last priority. I mean, and then the priority changes based on who's doing well. So let's say Guinevere is feeding and not doing very well. At that point, Guinevere is not the most valuable pick for the team. So it shifts, it changes. Like, it will change. So let's say Hayabusa was really bad, then that changes. He no longer goes from that top spot, he goes to the bottom. But I mean, the buff priority, like, it still stays the same. Like, but except for Hayabusa just removes from that spot. So instead of let's say instead of Guinevere being number 3, then Guinevere will be number 2, you know. So that's what it means. Like, if somebody's playing bad, then you like don't waste the buff on that person. So yeah, but give people a chance to see how they play first. Like, just because somebody dies once with a buff does not mean that, oh, now I can take the buff, they're playing bad. No, they could have just got in a tough situation or something. So give people the chance. Like, respect the chain of command, bro. Respect the chain of command. It's very, very important. So yeah, so this is with this team. Now we have one more team here. I don't want to make this video too long for you all, so we have one more team. Based on those explanations and stuff like that, let me know your thoughts in the comment section and all that. But here's the next example right here. So basically we're gonna do the same thing we did last time. Fanny, Valier, Granger, Chow, and Grok. This is the team that we're gonna be working with. How do you lane with this team? What's the laning gonna look like? So Fanny is going to be in the bottom lane. Valier is going to be in the mid lane. Grok is going to be accompanying Valier in the mid lane. Then Granger and Chow is going to be top. Now, the reason that I know people are used to going bottom lane with marksmen, but when you have a buff dependent solo laner, like if you have a Chow or something, if you have a Chow and you don't have like a Fanny, then more than likely Chow would be the solo laner. If he was playing a solo laner, then the marksman will be bottom. But if you have a solo laner who needs the buff, that's when you actually are going to switch up the lanes, because Fanny being a solo laner, if Fanny needs the buff. So like basically Fanny's going to need the bottom buff, and the reason that Fanny would not get the top buff is because the mid laner's rotation is usually around the top. The mid laner usually goes top. That's the normal rotation for the mid laner. If that makes sense. Like, hopefully this makes sense to you all. Because of the rotation of the mid laner gets top buff. So that means if there's another buff dependent hero, they get bottom buff, which means that the marksman and the tank should go top, and whoever else needs the buff should go bottom in that situation. So it's very situational. But yeah, let's jump into the heroes that need the buff. In this scenario, it's really just Fanny and Valier. Fanny is number 1. Fanny is completely useless without the buff. Like, there's no chance of Fanny being useful if she don't have the buff. So if you're taking a buff from your Fanny, just know you're putting your team in a 4v5 situation, because Fanny's not going to be able to do a thing. And this is why it is important to play multiple different heroes, because you don't know how bad Fanny needs a buff until you play Fanny and you realize, I used my cable 3 times. I used my cables 3 times and I can't move. Like, why don't I have energy? Like, if you have never been in that situation with Fanny, you won't know how annoying it is, or how, like, basically useless you are. You can't really do anything. So you gotta understand how bad Fanny needs the buff. So Fanny is top priority for sure. VeLL is second, of course, because VeLL, like, that extra damage and being able to rotate, get those kills, clear waves faster and stuff like that. And basically your mid laner is always going to be priority. Your mid laner is always going to be priority, man. Simply because the mid lane is where all the early game happens at. The mid lane is going to be rotating around, ganking people, helping you all kill people throughout your lanes and stuff. So you have to let the mid laner have his buff so he can go crazy. Granger is a hero that can benefit from the buff, but I mean, it's not as rushed as some of the, it's not as important as some of the other heroes. So if like, let's say the Fanny's not doing well, then yes, Granger would be next in line to get that buff, because especially Granger, like, can be insane when he has the buff. That extra damage and then the cooldowns and stuff like that, Granger can be insane. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much how the buff and laning is going to work and stuff like that. So hopefully this is very informative for you. There are some mid lane heroes who are not as buff dependent. Like, for instance, I would not want to see Odette unless there's nobody else who needs the buff, but I wouldn't want to see heroes like Odette, Aurora, Vexana, Farsa, like heroes like that. I don't think that they really need the buff. The buff is really for heroes that's just out here spamming skills, rotating a lot, that really depends on spam and skills. Like, when it comes down to a hero like Odette, she basically just, like, when a team fight is initiated, she jumps in using her ultimate and just stands there. And then, yeah, like, I mean, as opposed to somebody like VeLL, who's constantly dishing out skills, hitting people with fire constantly, and Gaijin, who's constantly throwing daggers out and grabbing onto people and destroying them. Like, heroes like that, like heroes who needs those high cooldowns, like, I feel like there's certain mid laners who are good for big team fights, and there's other mid laners who's good for just singling out, killing targets and stuff like that. Basically, if it's a team fight mid laner, they're not going to be a buff priority. They're not going to have buff priority. If it's if it's a like ganking solo killing type of mid laner, then that type of mid laner is definitely going to need the buff. So hopefully this was helpful. I tried to explain it as best as I can. It's kind of difficult to explain. Like, when you start to play in higher elo, you'll basically just know this stuff. But I think that this is important, especially for a lot of the lower elo players, to understand some of this stuff, because I think that this is crucial information that will help you get to higher elo. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you found this helpful, once again, drop that thumbs up, share the video, let it get spread around. I mean, yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm gonna catch you all on the next one, homies. Peace out, Joe.
I don't know nobody, so don't ask for no favors. Don't ask for no paper, they leave when you losing, but they coming back later. Promise they coming back later. I'm up now, she wanna